Good morning, everyone. My name is John Turner, and I would like to thank the ECAO for allowing for us to conduct this webinar this morning, and for everyone taking your time to attend the session this morning. First, I would like to mention that this webinar is being recorded to be shared across our online platforms. Last week, we delivered part one of part two of this webinar. We went through element 1, document control and record control. Element 4.2, management review and management of change. And today's part 2 session will be covering element 4, procurement and contract management, and element 8, training and communication. After I introduce today's speakers, we request you to take 2 minutes of your time to respond to a short poll. This way we can have a better understanding of your health and safety requirements that who is participating today. Okay, so I'm going to bring up screen. Okay, first participant, Tom Mackay has more than 35 years of experience in industrial and construction workplaces. In 2015, Tom successfully passed the Board of Canadian Registered Safety Professionals exam and accepted the position of Director of Health and Safety for a high voltage electrical contractor maintenance company specializing in design, construction, and maintenance of electrical substations and controlled buildings. In 2018, Tom was selected to chair the Electrical Contractors Association of Ontario Health and Safety Committee, comprised of both union and member company representatives. Tom became one of the dozen Infrastructure Health and Safety Association approved, certified, recognized external auditors in the province of Ontario. Sobi Ragunathan is the VP of Operations and Strategies and Services for 4S Consulting and holds a degree in occupational safety from the Toronto Metropolitan University. 4S Consulting Services is one of the largest occupational safety companies in Canada and is a trusted partner working with the government, trade associations, and workers' compensation groups to develop and implement safety programs for businesses across Canada. Sobi has led 4S to implement sustainable programs for its 1,500 clients, such as COR 2020, ISO 45001, that has developed a dynamic safety culture within those organizations, communities, thus impacting more than 4 million lives and preventing countless injuries, incidents, and fatalities. Matthew Ullman is a highly experienced professional with over 12 years of expertise in occupational safety management and has successfully enabled companies to develop sustainable health and safety management systems, providing valuable assistance to the clients implementing COR 2015, COR 2020, ISO 45001, and the WCB Excellence Program. Matthew is currently managing the accounts of 30 plus clients and has led 15 clients to achieving COR. Matthew has led 4 clients through the COR 2020 internal audit and transitioning process. With ongoing work on 7 other submissions, he holds a master's degree in construction management and bachelor's degree in civil engineering and is a COR certified internal auditor. Zishan Shima is more than 5 years experience in occupational safety. Zishan has worked in various industries with a realm of health and safety such as oil and gas, environmental safety, industrial, construction, and demolition. He manages a small team that handles 15 plus COR clients. Nishan has led 15 clients in the achieving COR accreditation and establishing health and safety management system within the organizations. He has an excellent communication and leadership skills. Nishan has completed his occupational safety degree and is a COR internal auditor. So let's start the poll. And please take the time to fill this out. This will give us a better idea of how to engage the session. Just another 30 seconds. Okay, so Matthew, I believe that you're going to be starting, so you can share your screen and.
Thank you so much, John. Before Matthew jumps on, I do want to thank ECAO for supporting their members in many different ways and forms, and this webinar is one of that as well. Matthew and Seshana are going to talk from the perspective of project managers who support many core clients, whether it's from core certification to core transition support. They're going to be speaking from their experience and what are some challenges the client has overseen and how they are working with them to overcome those. And we had picked 4 major topics. There are 14 elements. Matthew will take you through those details. And out of that, the 4 major ones is what we have covered as part of the 2 series webinar, which we covered element 1 and 14 last week. And this week, we will be covering 4 and 8. Today, we have Tom Mackay with us as well, who's also one of the 1819 of the core external auditors with IHSA, along with myself. I'm also one of the core external auditors. Both of us are here to actually give you pointers and suggestions based on what we have seen as opportunities for improvements, how you can go about, what are some challenges, how you can go about setting up your safety management system, some pitfalls. So we can definitely share some of the experience as external auditors and safety consultants who have been working in the field for quite some time. So thank you all for taking the time to join us. With that, I'll pass it over to Tom to say a few words.
Sorry, was that me?
Yes, Tom, if you do want to set a few comments.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. Yeah, as Sobi said, I've been in this field for quite some time and also an external auditor. So we're seeing this transition to COR 2020 has not been easy for a lot of firms. It's a lot different than 2015. For me, where I see most of the disconnect in the audits that I've completed so far is in the second question of each element, where it talks about the procedure, and we're going to go through one, so we'll see that in a few minutes. But it talks about the criteria for the procedure, and then the second part, each one of those criteria is worth 1 point. The struggle that I see companies having is not having some of those things covered in the procedure, and then the second, every question after question 2 in every element is implementation questions. And if you don't have these things in the procedure, the implementation questions don't get awarded. And the procedure questions are all worth 1 point, but the implementation questions are all worth 2, 3, or 4 points. So if you miss a couple of those just because they're not in your procedure, whether you do them or not, that is that costs you dearly on the audit in the end. So that's the biggest disconnect that I see, is between what is in the procedure itself and the implementation. And sometimes the companies have been doing all of the right things or a lot of the right things. However, it's not in the procedures, so they don't end up getting those points. Anyway, happy to answer questions later on when the time's appropriate, and thank you for having me here this morning.
Perfect. So thank you, John, for the introduction. Thanks, Sobi and Tom, for giving us a good outlook of the situation. So today I would like to leave you with element 8.1, which is about training. Training is a very important component. So I'm going to be sharing some of the best practices for effective implementation from our experience with our clients. We are very familiar with the list of the new 14 elements. I know a lot of us over here today's session are moving from COR 2015 to 2020. There could be some people who are taking up COR 2020 for the first time as well. But for those who are familiar with 2015 and moving towards 2020, these were some of the elements we thought has a major change from 2015 to 2020. That is 1.2, document and record control. This is an element which is affecting every other element. So that is one of it. Management of change is something totally new. And then we have training, which was a component of 2015. But in 2020, it has more scores, a separate sub-element, which has a lot of other requirements too. And then we have procurement and contractor management, which is a very small component in 2015. Now it is a larger component and an element of its own. So based on this, we had decided to take up these 4 topics for ECOA. And as part of the first session, we did cover element 1, document record control and management of change. Today, we are going to be taking up training as well as procurement and contractor management. So starting off with the training and communication, which is the element I'm going to be talking to you about. This has around 12% of the audit scoring. So you can understand it's an important component of the 2020. And training in specific has around 42 points of its own. And even in other programs like ISO or HEDSEP, it is a very important topic. There are around 3 topics related to this, even in the HEDSEP WSIB program, like training, communication, competency. So overall, this is an important component for your health and safety management system. So let's start off with an analogy. I always like to compare why do we need training and communication? And when I do that, I always compare it to the occupational health and management system to a well-oiled machine. So if you have a proper well-oiled machine, if you have the training is actually the fuel that powers your machine, and the communication is like the lubricant that makes it run smoothly. So just as a machine cannot function properly without proper fuel and lubrication, occupational health and safety management system cannot be effective without adequate training and communication. Today, let's talk about training in specific. Training aids in the development and maintenance of a job, specific knowledge and skills needed to work safely and effectively. So that, like a lubricant, it really helps you to fuel the whole thing. Training and legislation. Legislatively speaking too, it is the bare minimum requirement. On the screen, I have some of the fines that you could be having if you don't have the proper training for your employees. It could be safety awareness training programs. It could be job-specific training programs. So there are a lot of legislative requirements with respect to training as well. However, since today we are aiming at looking at the audit and transitioning, I would like to touch on what is the aim of any audit. The 2 major things I would say is assessing whether you are compliant with the requirements. The requirements could be legislative, it could be COR, going 1 step ahead, or ISO or HEDSEP. So the first aim of an audit is to see whether you're compliant with the requirements. The second and the more important one is also to check how effectively this is working, your management system is working, the effectiveness of the management system. So the auditor wants to check whether you have a system in place and is not looking for one-offs, but is trying to see whether you have a proper system in place that can be sustainable on the long run. When I deal with my different clients, one major point of first discussion I have is about the common challenges. So with respect to this particular element, some of the questions I would like to share today, they come up with problems like, how do we identify the required trainings? Yes, we know it's legislative, we know we need to do job-specific training, but how do we identify what are our mandatory and job-specific training? Okay, if that is the challenge, the next one would be, okay, we have identified, how do we implement it? And how do we ensure that we keep on doing this? How do we monitor? If I have 80 employees, how do I know who's working at height is expiring? GHS is expiring. How do I maintain this whole process? The other challenge they always talk to me about with the new documentation and control being implemented in 2020 is about storing these records. It could be your orientation records like new employee orientation or site orientation. A lot of companies do maintain such documents. However, what the challenge over there is if a project was completed 6 months ago, they do not have the copies. They lose the copies. But as per documentation control and record control, you need to be keeping this and storing this in a way which you can retrieve it if it is required. So that is another challenge they bring up. And implementing a sustainable system. So you can have systems where you are using it, following it over a paper copies, or you could use Excel, but you need to have a proper sustainable system in case you want to scale up your company to ensure your record is stored and retention and ensuring that they're current. So these are some of the common challenges I see my clients always talking to me about. So I will be focusing on how we help our clients and how you could also be thinking about so that you are successful in what you do. So the first component is the policy and procedure. Let's look into that. So as we all know, as we discussed last time, in COR 2020, every element is required to have a policy, which is basically the leadership's commitment to that particular element. Similarly, in training too, they do need a commitment from the senior management saying, yes, we are committed to training and we are going to put our resources and budget and everything for the training. So that is something which the company's leadership needs to come up with. The second step is to have a procedure. So like Tom Mackay was telling us just now, procedure is a very important component in COR 2020. I've had a few internal audit reports come to me as well. In the report, we noticed that if the points are not there in the procedure, even if you're implementing it, you don't get the score for it, even in internal audits. I'm glad to hear even in external audits, that's the same way they look at things. So procedure is very important, that we address each and everything that is required of us in the procedure. So I will not be going into too much of detail in today's session, but the major components in the training procedure that we would need to address would be roles and responsibilities. In 2020, it is very important to ensure that you have clarity on whose roles and responsibility, what do they need to do, each of them, what they need to do. It could be who is monitoring your trainings, who is ensuring the trainings are completed, whose job is to check the trainings before when people enter site. So all that needs to be captured in detail. The other component would be competency. This is something new in COR 2020. We will be talking about that. And identifying training needs. It's important to have a process to identify your training needs, and only then you would be able to implement it. Orientation, yes, this was a component we had in 2015 too, but in 2020, we shall see what more is required. And evaluation of learning is a very new component of 2020, and that is also important on how do we evaluate. You might be, at what stage do you evaluate the learning that you get from these trainings? So these are the major components which you would have to ensure is part of your procedure. Moving further, let's look at some of the important components. Like I said, training is a very big element, so I'm going to be taking up certain components and explaining to you how it works for us. Competency and training needs is the first topic I would like to touch upon. And that would be covering some of these questions from 8.1.3. Does training accommodate differing levels of responsibility? Have you seen the competency? Like, what is competency? How have you identified what is required of each role? Has the organization conducted a training needs analysis? How would you know what training is required unless you do a proper training needs analysis? Have employees received training that is required by legislation? So first we need to be aware what is required by legislation, then ensure it is being implemented and ensure that everybody has it. So these are some of the questions which we are going to be going through in the next couple of slides. First of all, there is a new word in 2020 about competency. So let's look at the definition of competency. A person is considered competent if he has the knowledge of the hazards and risks, if he demonstrates understanding, working knowledge, so that is more of experience, and training with regards to the hazards, and aptitude. So in a nutshell, we were trying to ensure that we take care of, we get inspired by this definition and come up, because a competency requirement list is a requirement of COR 2020. So this is one of the samples we were explaining to our clients, where you can use qualification, experience, and training as a rule book for you to see what is the requirement for each of the roles. So that way you get an idea, you're standardizing it within a company, what is the expectation and what are people up to the mark on. So that's all about competency. Now going to some of the other questions, like how do you ensure that the trainings and different levels of responsibilities are taken care of? So when it comes to processes, putting processes in place, I always talk to my clients about people-dependent processes and process-dependent processes. So these are two things which we can look at. It is important that you have a process-dependent management system, so that even if somebody is not dependent on one particular person, so even if somebody is not in the picture, the process continues to roll within your organization, for which use of technology is definitely going to help you, and it will also help you in the scalability and scope of expansion. So today I will be talking more about our product, which is ForSafeCom, and how we utilize it. But you can be using any type of software or any type of tools to ensure that you are going to be ensuring that there's a proper implementation in place. So let me explain how do we do it with our clients. So setting up the process is the first step. So ensuring that you understand the requirements and putting everything together is the first step that we need to do. So when we have a new client, what we normally do is we try to understand what are the different tasks that they have, because the hazard assessments are the backbone of how we build our occupational health and safety management system. And it is very important that we do this so that we identify all the different trainings that are applicable for all the different tasks we do at our company. So this is the first step, identifying all the different trainings that are required based on the task that is being done. The second step of the process is to understand the client's company, to understand what is the different levels you have, what are the different positions you have in your company. Do you have site workers, site supervisors, senior managers? And the next step is to ensure that you look at both these data. Now you know what are the different levels in your, or different positions in your company. You know what are the different tasks, and you interpolate both of these. So you get a matrix like this saying what are the different tasks that an office worker is going to be doing, what are the different tasks that a driver might be doing. So once this is all part of the setup, once all this data is collected and put together, we can set up the system for you. We help our clients set up the system that way. It makes it very foolproof, and it makes it very easy for people to be in compliance. So have employees receive training that is required by legislation? So this is one of the questions that is part of COR 2020. So how our ForSafeCom system is set up is you have this page. You can set up all the different tasks by position. So just taking you through some of it. The second question is, does the training accommodate differing levels of responsibility? So I'm going to show you how we take care of these two questions through making this a process and making it foolproof for our clients. So these two things, first, legislative trainings as well as differing levels of responsibilities. So if this is our page, we have something called, we create a package called the Basic Supervisor Package, which would take care of all your legislative trainings, as well as if this is a supervisor, he would need some knowledge on emergency response, accident investigation, and awareness. So certain things that he requires would be put as a package. So anytime a new client or a new employee or new supervisor is enrolled in your company, you can just select it and go ahead with that. So it makes it very easy. So let me look at a case where you have a new employee joining your company. So I would go to the task by position matrix over here, and I would look at, maybe I'm looking at an office employee. So I click office employee, this pops up. It's already auto-populated on what task that an office employee would require. If I look at the online trainings that they would be having, even that is interconnected already. So it is foolproof, and you're ensuring that the right kind of training is given to him. Let's take another example. Now let's take site supervisor. We saw office employee doesn't have too many tasks, but a site supervisor has many tasks. So when this is already pre-selected for them, he has a basic supervisor training package, which covers his legislative trainings and all the supervisor role related trainings, while the other tasks are also covered. If you look at the online trainings, it is already pre-selected on what type of trainings they would be requiring for the task that they are doing. So these are some examples, like site workers. If I select, the same thing, the online trainings are already selected. Therefore, you have built a system which is foolproof and which can be done very easily. Here, I'm just demonstrating how we built it for for our clients using our product, but there could be many other systems which you could follow. But the aim of everything would be to ensure that you have a proper implementation, which is making compliance easy for you and your employees. The next step would be monitoring. So you set up the whole system. Now, how do you ensure you monitor this process? Because it is important, because as per COR, you need to ensure that they receive the legislative requirement training, they have the trainings, and training is provided prior to a worker completing a relevant task. So it's important that you keep monitoring their trainings. Using a system, it's very easy to know what the level of training of online trainings is. So that's easy for a owner or a high level management to know. And you can also monitor the different trainings by pulling up a matrix very easily. You would know what are the trainings that are valid, what are expiring soon. So that way you have an idea. It makes it easy for you to monitor the whole thing. Moving on to the next component, orientation. Yes, this was part of the previous topic as 2015 too. There are some questions related to, is the training provided prior to worker performing a relevant task? Is orientation mandatory for all workers, and orientation training being provided as per the procedure? These are some of the things which is related to orientation. So if you're using a system, you would be able to pull up the records of all the different employees in your company and what type of training they have taken very easily. So that way you have the records. Many times I see that a lot of clients are not able to keep up these records, especially site orientation. If you have a 3-month project in beginning of December till January, and then the project is completed, we see people who do it on paper copies lose the copies and then they're not able to produce it. So that way keeping record retention was a problem. So using a system, you can keep all the records and you can also pull it up whenever you want using a site orientation report. Moving to another question is the training provided prior to a worker performing the relevant task? Now let's think of this as a supervisor. In case you are a supervisor, how do you ensure that every worker who's coming to your site is having the relevant training for satisfying this particular question? Let's think as a supervisor. So in our system, we have a product where this is my QR card. So every employee gets a QR card. So all my trainings are linked to this QR card. So if I'm a worker, I go into a site and my supervisor is asking to look at all my certificates, I show my QR card and then he can scan it. And when he scans it, this is what he sees. He sees all the list of my trainings over here that I've ever taken. So whatever training he needs, he can look at it. And if he wants to see my supervisor health and safety awareness training, if he clicks on that, he sees my certificate. So this makes it very easy in terms of compliance for him to check what trainings I have and then fill up the site orientation on what type of trainings I have. So in other words, this is really making his life easy, my life easy. I do not have to carry my certificates all the way. So, and he's able to check whether all the required trainings are, I have all the required trainings that is required for that particular task. The last component which I want to touch on, the second last I would say, is the evaluation of learning, which is another point which is very new to COR 2020. And a lot of my clients are worrying about how do we evaluate training, the learning of the trainings. So does the organization evaluate learning as per procedure? That is 8.1.12. So it is, the aim of it is to continuously evaluate and assess your workers' understanding. All our trainings on the system normally do end with a quiz. So you are evaluating their learning soon after the training. But it is also important to evaluate and assess their learning after a certain stage. So different ways you could be doing this is you could have some mandatory quizzes right after the training or at a later stage to gauge the effectiveness of the training. Supervisor's observation. This is another important informal way of doing it, where a supervisor could observe the workers to see whether he's implementing everything that he's been trained on. And worksite inspection. As part of that, he could also be checking on that. Unscheduled quizzes and surveys is also a good way to just check how well did they understand the training or is there a requirement for training. So that is all about evaluation of training. Now coming to document and record control. We know this is a new component that is added to every element and it's affecting every element. I just wanted to show you how it's affecting every element in a detailed way. So when we talk about training records and documents, there are a lot of things that are involved. It could be your training policy, your training procedure. It could be a new employee orientation form, site orientation forms, your training needs analysis, your competency requirement list. All these are different examples of documents and records related to this particular element. So we need to remember, as we discussed in our last session, for document and record control, you need to ensure that you are keeping the records as per what you have mentioned and ensuring that all this is taken care of. So you need to have a proper system to help you ensure that you are keeping all these records in a way that it can be assessed, it can be looked at, older document, obsolete documents are taken away. All this needs to be ensured using a proper system. So that is what I wanted to cover in today's session. Thank you so much for your time, and over to you. If you have any questions, please reach out to us.
Thank you so much, Matthew. I think you took us so much in detail with how to go about fulfilling the requirements of element 8 for training, and you use some samples and examples of how you support the forest clients. Thank you so much for that. So Sishan, if you can kindly quickly take us through element 4, please. And those of you who have questions, please do post them in chat so that we will continue to answer those questions, and we will take up the questions at the end as well. So thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I want to start off by saying thank you to all those before me. Thank you to John Turner, Sobi, and Tom Mackay for the kind words and introduction. And thank you to Matthew Ullman for an excellent explanation on element number 8 of COR 2020. Today, I will be explaining the procurement and contractor management program, which is notably element 4 of the COR 2020 program. I want to start off by saying this program was an extract of 2.11 from COR 2015. However, I would like to discuss the purpose and intent as to why it's been extracted and made into a separate element prior to beginning the explanation here. So the whole purpose behind this program is that when an organization is hiring service providers, they may be exposed to or create new hazards in the workplace. It is important to make sure that these hazards are assessed and controlled. And that's very important because as we introduce new contractors or we introduce new service providers into our working environments, with the addition of these contractors and service providers, new hazards are introduced into the workplace. Hazards which sometimes are affecting them by entering your workplace, and of course the hazards that they may introduce into your already existing workplace. So it is important that these hazards are controlled and assessed and controlled, and appropriate controls are provided. Now, before I delve any further into it, I want to bring back the focus to what the COR 2020 program primarily operates around, and that is two major fundamental components: the policy and the procedure. So as defined by the COR audit tool itself, a policy is a general commitment, direction, or intention, and is formally stated by top management's commitment to the implementation and improvement of its management system. Now, that may sound very complicated, but it's actually speaking to the what, if we were to summarize. It is the what of the program. So what are you going to do about the program? And where is the commitment that it is going to happen? The procedure itself is defined as a documented specified method to carry out an activity. And the procedure can then be summarized as to the 5 W's: the who, what, where, when, why, and how. If the procedure can successfully answer those 5 W's and the how in explaining the commitment statement, it will be a successful procedure because it will provide explanation as to how the policy itself is going to be enacted upon and how it's going to be executed in the workplace itself. So 4.1 says, does your organization have a documented policy statement for procurement and contractor management that is signed and dated by senior management? So again, as you can see, it's referring to the what. So does it have a policy statement first and foremost? And then is there commitment in that policy statement from the senior management team themselves? The concept of COR is that it doesn't want one person to call all the shots. It doesn't want one level of the organization to call all the shots. Rather, it wants that top manager commitment and involvement all the way from the top to the line workers down below. So when it speaks to the policy, here's a sample policy that we here at 4S like to work with for our clients. So you can see that the policy statement has the document, record, and control aspect included already. And that's, as Matthew Ullman has explained earlier, and thank you, Matthew, that every element is contingent on element 1.2, which is document and record control. And then you can see down below is the policy statement itself. As you go through, and I'll give you a few seconds here to kind of read over it, it will demonstrate that it's going to cover the what of what's going to happen with this program, what is going to be covered, what are the requirements of this program itself, and then notably so, as required by 4.1 as well, senior management commitment down below. Senior management is committed to providing time, budget, and resources needed to ensure the implementation of the program itself. So I'll give everyone a few seconds here, and then we'll carry on. Perfect. And now once 4.1, the policy statement has been looked at, it's been completed, checked off. The next part of it is 4.2. As with every procedure, and thank you, Tom, for explaining this, is the procedure itself. 4.1, or the point 1 of each element, is the policy, and the point 2, which is here 4.2, it is now the procedure. The procedure is quite detailed, and it goes over exactly what requirements are needed to satisfy the program requirements. So for the first part, we're going to be focusing on requirement for the contractor or service provider to complete a hazard assessment as per element 2, hazard assessment, analysis and control, and element 3, controls. So talking about hazard assessments, we here at 4S, and of course, clients are free to choose and utilize any system that they may prefer, and there are many systems out there, but here at 4S, we like to use the 4SafeCom to satisfy this requirement. We want to start off by looking at job hazard assessments in 2 ways, or risk assessments in 2 ways. The first is the fundamental library of risk assessments that each and every organization should possess as part of their library. These fundamental risk assessments will cover off all the tasks that are performed for the scope of the work that the company executes. And we therefore start off by looking at those and then breaking them down into critical and non-critical tasks. So here you can see a sample that we provided here is office cleaning. So delving further into here, once we go through, and the way we assess the risk assessment here is that we take a look at the risk table, which is the severity times the probability, and therefore it gives you a rating which will either lead the task to being critical or non-critical. And then down below, you will see that what the task name is, the team members that were used to develop this. And once again, COR does have an important emphasis that different members of the organization are used when developing these hazard assessments, the date as to when it was developed, who was it reviewed and approved by, and of course, this part over here is contingent on senior management review and approval. If the senior management team is the one that is giving the commitment to the program itself, then they should definitely be involved to also approve the hazard assessments in all different parts of the program. And of course, when this review and approve was done. The version control is implemented as well. So this way, the fundamental library of hazard assessments can be executed and conducted for an organization. So as we discussed, there are 2 ways to take a look at these hazard assessments. So that was the fundamental component which each organization should have as part of its library, which covers the entire scope of the work and the entire realm of hazard assessments for the organization. The next part is going to be the daily risk assessments. So the daily risk assessments cover off various components, specific components to that day's worth of work. So here for us, we have something called a pre-job safety assessment. The pre-job or PSA, pre-job safety assessment form, allows contractors to utilize this form to do a daily risk assessment. It starts off by identifying which project the assessment is being done on, the date that has been completed, who it was completed by, supervisor, competent worker, PPE inspections, was PPE inspected, and were tools inspected. These 2 components are very important as part of the PSA, as often they are overlooked. And last but not least, add today's job-specific tasks. So while the fundamental JHAs may be expansive and they may be large and broad in nature, the daily risk assessments do allow contractors and workers to shorten down the JHA for the day and focus on that day's activities only. Okay. And of course, that spoke to element number 2 as required by the procedure. And now here is the a sample of element 3 of how it ties back to controls itself. So here's a sample safe work practice that we use here at 4S. And as you can see, the document and control process is located above. And then it goes down to specify the certain hazards that may be introduced as a result of this work and the associated trainings that are required. It then goes on to further expand. So when you have a risk assessment, it covers off sort of what the risk levels are and sort of generic controls and things like that to satisfy those risks. But then there are, in element number 3, there are controls and which lead into practices and procedures that then expand on those controls that were mentioned in the job hazard analyses, and they kind of provide explanation as to how and what some of those specific hazards are when executing the task itself. So I'll give a few seconds here just to kind of take a look at the layout of what it's all about and how it does satisfy the requirements of what element 4 is looking for. Moving swiftly forward, the next part of the procedure itself and the element speaks towards subcontractor documentation. And we're going to tackle this part now in conjunction with the next 3 steps itself. So 4.3, 4.4, and 4.5. So 4.3 speaks to, has your organization followed its OHS criteria for selecting contractors and service providers? Has your organization monitored your contractors and service providers as per the procedure? And has your organization evaluated the contractors as per the procedure? So you can see that it runs you through right from the beginning, a full cycle process from all the way from having a policy, a procedure, and then selecting the contractors themselves before they come to your site, monitoring them while they're on your site, and then of course, evaluating them. But let's speak to that again. So when it comes to selection, we're talking about pre-qualifying documentation. What documents are in place to select these contractors prior to them coming onto your site? What about monitoring? What will you look for when you're monitoring your subcontractor and service providers as they execute work on your site? Evaluation, how will you evaluate them at the end? Should they come back to your site? Should they not come back to your site? And why? And of course, the procedure also speaks to specific forms. All 4 must be clearly defined in the procedure and implemented. Let's break them down a little bit further here. So pre-qualifying documents. What documents or forms will you require from your subcontractor or service providers to complete and comply with prior to working on your projects? So again, why are you selecting them and how are they being selected? What is the criteria? Monitoring. What documents or forms will you require to be submitted by your subcontractors or service providers throughout the lifeline of the project? So as they continue to do work on your site, what are you asking of them? How do you want to monitor them? Evaluation documents. Again, what documents or KPIs will you use to evaluate the performance of your subcontractors or service providers interim or upon completion of their work? Now, while all of this may sound a bit daunting and a bit expansive, we're going to go ahead and cover some samples so we can break down each one of these categories. Let's start off by pre-qualifying document samples. Perhaps you'd like to collect from your subcontractors insurances, legal insurances, WSIB insurance as required and mandated by the province of Ontario, one under specific criteria. Liability insurance. Maybe you'd like to take a look at liability insurance for any property damage or if anything happens on your site. Perhaps motor vehicle insurance, depending on what type of work and what the nature of the work is that's being executed on your site. The next broad category you may want to consider can be documents and records, employee training records. And thank you, Matthew, as he provided earlier, training records are extremely important. Valid, up-to-date training records provide competency and they show and prove competency levels for the hiring contractors. OHSMS, Occupational Health and Safety Management System. Perhaps you like a copy of their system in place as well. And any notable policies and procedures that may affect their work or may affect you as the contractor. Last but not least, statistics is also a major component that should be evaluated, as recommended to be evaluated prior to hiring a contractor on site. Perhaps you would like to take a look at their WSIB claims, what their injury rates for the past 5 years have been. Have they received any Ministry of Labor orders? Any relevant lost time data? And what is the rate of their accidents or injuries? I'll give a few seconds here just to kind of go, just for the viewing audience here to take a look, and then we'll move on to monitoring document samples. Perfect. Let's talk about monitoring document samples. So we discussed the monitoring samples are those, the monitoring documents are those documents that you like to collect from your subcontractors while they are on your site and while they are in the lifeline of the project itself. So we touched base on this earlier. Risk assessments are extremely important and fundamental to the program itself. So risk assessments is definitely one that you want to ask for, whether it be a copy of their fundamental JHA library prior to coming to site or while on site, and then of course the daily risk assessments as well, which goes back to the work that they're going to be executing for that day. Training records. Of course, training happens to expire, it gets validated, new workers, old workers, so on and so forth. Training records must be kept up to date and valid. A log of all accidents or incidents that happen on your site. As a contractor, you would definitely want to know of these accidents or incidents that are happening on your site. Any near misses, hazard reporting for any hazards that are introduced to the workplace as a result of the subcontractors, or vice versa, or how are they being affected by the other contractors that are already present in your working environment. Any updates to the occupational safety management system that they may have, and any related documents. Orientations, absolutely crucial. And as Matthew touched earlier, this is important and mandatory as part of the COR program. Inspections, this covers off all various types of inspections, maybe pre-use inspections, perhaps weekly inspections or monthly inspections, or any other specified frequency. And of course, insurances. As we know, WSIB insurances expire every 90 days and it must be renewed, and other insurances that expire at other specified frequencies, annually or semi-annually, whatever the case may be. Let's talk about evaluation document samples. So now going back, and we'll kind of tie all this together now, we had a policy in place, which was committed to by senior management. We now had the procedure in place that was executed as well. And now we have selected our contractors. They have come to site, we have monitored them, and now the work is done. What about the evaluation process? How will you evaluate these contractors? So you can use different KPIs or different documents to evaluate them, but some of the ones that we recommend here that I personally work with our clients to go ahead with are quality and completion of pre-qualifying documents. Did this satisfy the requirement of your pre-selection documents, or did they lead you on? What was their quality of completion? Was it accurate, or was it messy? Quality and completion of monitoring documents. Were they able to provide you with what you needed when you required, or were they always behind on their paperwork? What was their quality of work? Again, different KPIs. So they may have given you the selection documents, they may have given you the monitoring samples, so on and so forth, but their quality of work and performance could have been poor. So we recommend that you evaluate that as well. Did they present any scheduling, timeline, or budgeting issues? Did you have to issue any infractions, violations, or disciplinary actions to the contractor? How were their client relations on site? And this is very important as well. As new contractors come to site and the work environment continues to change, it is important that client relations are also evaluated for the overall harmony of the site itself. So speaking towards change, communication is an important factor of this element itself, because there's consistent change with the introduction of different contractors and service providers to sites. So 4.6 says, has your organization communicated with relevant workplace parties when changes have occurred? We here at Forest, we always like to recommend our clients to use something that can be documented and kept as evidence, such as a toolbox talk form. It starts off by describing which project the communication was made on, the date of communication, who was completed by, and the topic. The topic is important as it will discuss the change that is being communicated, the number of participants from subcontractors or own company personnel. And then, of course, if there are any notes, comments, questions, or concerns that were asked or solved during this toolbox talk, and then the supervisor and worker signatures will be included as well. Now, the important part of the toolbox talk versus something like sending out an email or something that's a one-way communication is that you have that participation and that chance for feedback from those that are being communicated with. It also serves as documentation because you can have a record that's produced. So that's why we here at Forest like to, amongst the different methods, we like to provide our clients with a toolbox talk form to cover off these changes and go through and document. Thank you so much for tuning in on Element 4 today.
Thank you so much, Seshan, for taking us through the details of Element 4. We are here to answer any questions and concerns you may have. So please start posting any of your questions or concerns you may have with the COR 2020 transition. One of the things I will say, and I'll pass it over to Tom as external auditor, is a couple of things I look for when I actually go out for external audit is I'm trying to get a sense of the culture of the organization. Even though we as external auditor follow a very strict protocol for looking at the audit document and how the program is implemented, I'm generally trying to get a feel for the organizational safety culture. Is the program implemented just to put a tick mark on, yes, we are following all the elements for COR, or do you have a safety culture starting from your senior management, and then you have implement the program, so safety management system in such a way that it is sustainable. It is not dependent on the internal auditor who is there at the time. And being external auditor, we have been through many scenarios and challenges where the internal auditor who started the program has left. I just recently did an audit, COR 2020, and where they're on to the 4th internal auditor within the last 3 years. It is very, very common, and it is happening because resources are stretched, and there's not many trained COR internal auditors out there, so they do get transitioned out or headhunted out. These are some of the challenges I want you to kind of think about when you're thinking about your transition tool, because you must have implemented COR and now you're thinking about going into transition, or you're starting off with COR 2020. Step back and look at how we are going to integrate health and safety management system as part of your organizational culture, as well as how are you going to implement sustainable tools that's not dependent on 1 or 2 COR individuals. Because in an event, if something happens to one of those individuals, it could be personal leave, sickness, or they get headhunted out, what is going to happen to your program? So you should always look at a sustainable way of maintaining your program, no matter who is involved. The only way for you to do that is it has to be embedded as part of your organizational culture. The second thing I normally look for is how detailed is your hazard assessment. Hazard assessment is the foundation of your safety management system. And from there, everything else comes out, element 8, element, all the other element comes out of your hazard assessment. Based on your hazards and exposures, how we are going to manage the risk mitigation, and how we are going to communicate to your employees, how are you going to safeguard them at the source, along the path, at the worker, all that is determined based on the hazard assessment. And the last piece I would say that I definitely see opportunity for improvement in many audits I have done is subcontractor management. It is a hit and miss. Many organizations do get subcontractors based on the lowest price that they offer, which, all of us are in business, we do need to sustain and maintain the business, but think about your risk mitigation. Subcontractors working at your site, again, being electrical contractors, you may have subcontractors that you're piecing off a small piece of your work or whatever it is, but think about the liability aspect. Don't just look at, ask them to submit a copy of their health and safety manual, because nowadays health and safety manuals, you could just go download a health and safety manual, put your name on it, and call it your health and safety manual. Is that enough? There are many different ways to maintain subcontractors, but subcontractors, when they are working for you, the liability is on you. So from a due diligence perspective, you do need to make sure that they are not just putting a tick mark on giving you training records and copy of the safety management, safety manual. Do a little bit more in terms of, do they have a good health and safety program? Nowadays, you can encourage your subcontractors to actually maybe even think about participating in the safety excellence to build their safety management system in detail rather than just having a Band-Aid solution. So I can be sitting here sharing many solutions and options. I want to pass it over to Tom to share some of his feedback as well from what he has seen.
Yeah, I agree with everything that I heard you say, Sobi, especially the safety culture. It's easy when you go into, it's easy for me and most people to go into a company and feel the culture right away. So you can see what they do with the documentation, but once you get out into the field and you get away from the office and you get away from that sort of formal, it's a little more informal, then you can feel it. You feel it through the supervisor or the project manager. You can feel how invested they are in worker safety, and that comes out through the field documents, through the hazard assessments, daily hazard assessments, and things like that. So I agree with that 100%. Culture starts at the top of the company, and if it's important at the top, then it's going to be important on the way down. And if the company is invested in their employees' health and safety, the workers will know it and they'll feel it, and it'll be important for them to do the things that the safety management system tells them to do and use the tools that are offered there in the way that they're supposed to. A couple of things that I just thought about as we're going through. I agree that hazard assessment is the starting point for everything also. So what my experience has been with some companies that they kind of start in the middle instead of looking at the big umbrella. What do we do as a company? What is our scope of work? Because once you figure out what the scope of work is, then you can look at what are the hazards with those different scopes of work. Even down to things like having warehousing and shops under different regulations. And I don't know how many companies that have been into that don't even have the different regulations, construction versus industrial, depending on where they are in the business. So those are some of the things that I see. The other thing I thought about is as Suzanne was speaking there was about how do you evaluate a subcontractor? And I think that was a really good presentation on how to do it. Just to go one step further, you may want to have a form where you put some of these things that were discussed in the meeting today, and actually have a form where you sit down either pre-project or annually or however you decide and evaluate that contractor. How did they do? And then what do you do with that information? So now you know how they performed. Did they have incidents? Did you have to provide warnings? You have assessed their hazard assessment documents and things like that. What do you do with that information? So for me, I like to see it sort of a yes, use this contractor, they're good. Use this contractor with caution. Don't use this contractor ever again. Those kinds of things. So because it's one thing to assess it, but you have to do something with that information. Otherwise, there's no point in the assessment at all. So I often see the last part not being done. I rarely see all of it being done actually. But the last part about what do we do with this evaluation? And I think it's really good to sit down with a project manager, supervisor, those kinds of folks and say, okay, the job's over. How did these contractors perform? And if you have a checklist that you go down with all of those things discussed today, it's very easy to say, okay, this is our experience on the ground with this contractor. And then you can go from there. You can meet with the contractor. If they need improvement, they might be great. And you want to make sure that you use that contractor again. So that's kind of what I was thinking as we were going through.
Thank you so much, Tom. We are here to answer any questions you may have. All of you seem awfully quiet. I know the last session we had a lot of people were asking a lot of questions. So either that or we have done a thorough job in trying to explain these elements so you guys got all the information. We are here to support you and answer any questions that we can with this transition, because it is quite a bit of work, quite a bit of undertaking. And it is a long process because COR 2015 to 2020 is completely different It's almost like you are rewriting your policies and procedures again and realigning everything to meet the requirements. I mean, I'm sure all of you know why COR 2020. It is in alignment to ISO 45001. And COR, I always tell all of our clients, if you're an Ontario-based client, if you're only serving in Ontario, COR is a great tool for a safety management system. Anybody in construction, it starts with buyers requesting for it, but despite that, it's a great standard safety management system to implement. ISO, if you are providing services across the borders, different provinces across the country owned by a large organization, maybe ISO 45000 is a solution for you. With this transition, it is alignment to ISO 45001. Even once you have COR 2020 or ISO 45001, then the next journey is for you to become the safest employer in Ontario and become the SOCI accredited company as the safest employer with the CPO's office, Chief Prevention Officer's office, which is a huge prestige to have, being the safest employer. It's a great brand recognition. At the same time, there is financial incentives for that. Once you become a safest employer, you do have 3 years of WSIB rebates that comes to you. So there are definitely many reasons for implementing a sustainable safety management system in place. So get started. If you do need any help, we all are here to support you. We are sharing based on what we have been exposed to. I always say to many of my clients, and when I do webinars on due diligence, people, process, technology. We live in this world of technology today. So if you can integrate some of the pieces to make it sustainable with technology, I think it would make your life a lot easier for you. And again, there are many different options for technology. Rule of thumb, I always say, have a system that you choose that has an LMS component and the document management, forms, builders, everything as part of it to make your life easy. If not, you will have 2 or 3 different systems who don't interact with each other, and then you need to pull records from various different areas. From the time you onboard an employee, you should be able to train them as part of the orientation, all the mandatory training, all the awareness-based training, your company orientation, your policies, procedures, hazard assessments have to be acknowledged. So if you can kind of take them through that process and have those acknowledgements as part of your system, that makes your life very, very easy for you to manage and maintain health and safety. And then ongoing, you have your dashboards, your inspections, investigations, everything comes out of that. That's a full safety management solution. So if you can focus on how you are going to work with the people, then come up with the processes, then have a technology solution, that is going to make your life much more easier with safety management system. So maintaining your safety management system. I think we have gone more than 4 minutes. If you guys have any questions, we all are here to answer that. So please let us know.
So, but one thing I want to mention, because a lot of people on, I think we have about 9 participants at this point. If you are not using an online management system, and some people are scared of technology or haven't seen a demonstration of a system, I'd be more than happy, just as an option, just to provide the support through this association to be able to do a demonstration. So at least, and there's different systems out there. ForSafeCom is one system out of many. But I'd be more than happy to be able to take the time, do a virtual demonstration to show you what the benefits are having a system, see if you feel that would help your transition or also getting to your accreditation. And additional to that, again, we're here to support you. There is options that we support for our various clients or provide you continuous insights on that part of it. So it's not gonna, I'm just letting you know that we are here because you don't know what you don't know. That's my famous saying all day. So.
Well, thank you so much, Tom. Thank you for, I know as part of ECAO, yeah, always they are supporting your members, and they are here as partners of, associate partners of our ECAO. So any help any one of you need, definitely reach out. And if there's no questions, we must have done an awesome job in explaining, I'm assuming that. If you thought this webinar was very useful for you, please give us a few words on that so that we can continue to provide more webinars. We can schedule more webinars like this on an ongoing basis, where we can bring more tips and tools on how you can do COR 2020 transition. There are many other topics in relation to health and safety we can talk about. So we really appreciate it. Thank you so much for all of you attending today. Have yourself a safe and an awesome day.
Thanks. Bye, everybody.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Matthew, Seshan, and the support team. Thanks, John. Bye for now.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.